Hey guys, it's Hannah and welcome to Novelty Chats, the video where I just ramble on about the stuff that isn't important enough to make a proper video about. Since it's Novelty Chats, I always have my cup of tea. If you want to pause this and go and get a cup of tea or coffee or whatever you want, feel free. And the mug of the day is Teacher of All Things. It's a good size mug. I like it. I got this in Universal Studios in Florida when I was there. They had all different types. They had like Dad of All Things, Mum, Auntie, Grandma, whatever. My mum managed to find a teacher one at the back, so I got it. I like that it's an apple as well. I can't remember if like all of them were an apple. That would be a bit weird. If like, Grandma, you're great. Here's a mug with an apple on it. So today I thought I would sort of do kind of like a reading story time about the book that I am currently reading. I am currently reading The Tales of Olga de Polga by Michael Bond, who is the author of the Paddington Bear books. And this, my friends, will be my 100th book of 2017. I will have completed 100 books. And yes, I only started this last night. I haven't completed it yet. But by the time this video is up, I will have completed it. And I've hit my 100 book challenge. Like, I'm so psyched. I cannot believe it. But when I was reading my 99th book, here's one I prepared earlier, which was Assassinations, a history of political murder, which was really interesting. Obviously non-fiction, and it just went through different sort of political figures that were murdered, why they were murdered, who by, conspiracies surrounding them, if it had any political impact. It went through Julius Caesar, Thomas Becket, Henry IV, John Paul Moray, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Emilio Zapata, not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly either, John F. Kennedy, and then it sort of talked about foreign policy and whether assassination actually works and has any political impact, and what current day assassination looks like, and looking at like terrorism for political reasons and stuff. And yeah, it was just really fascinating. But as I was reading this, I was thinking, I'm bound to be nearing 100. So I looked on Goodreads and found that it was book 99. And I thought, well, I've got to pick something special for my Goodreads 100th book. Because last year I read 30-ish books, and I set my Goodreads goal this year to 60. I had intents to double that, and I have far surpassed that. When I hit 60, I think I hit 60 about May time, I doubled it up to 100, and I can't believe it. It's been awesome. I want to thank all you guys for the support and recommendations you've been giving me throughout the year, because that has definitely helped, and there's no way I would have hit 100 books if I had not joined the BookTube community. But this is a book that I recently found in my parents' attic and brought to join my collection here. And this book holds a bit of a personal story behind it and a bit of sentimental value, which is why I chose this to be my 100th book of the year. As you can probably guess from the title of my channel, I am someone who loves reading, but I am also dyslexic. For those of you who are not sure, dyslexia is a learning difficulty. It is a miswiring of the brain. It's an actual physical problem, but it gives a lot of problem with lots of different aspects of life. But one of the most prominent ones is problems with reading and writing. It can also affect speech, coordination, memory, some number work, reading the time, lots of different things. But the main sort of problem that it presents is to do with reading and writing spelling, those kinds of things. It's just a problem with the brain where it doesn't work correctly. I cannot sound words out. I can only read words if I have memorized it and know what that word is. If you were to give me a word and say to read that and it wasn't a common word like white or goat, those are some random words, I would not be able to say it. I cannot sound it out. It's just I read purely by memory of knowing what all the words I've ever read are, type thing. And I wasn't diagnosed till I was 12 years old. And because I wasn't failing at school, this is why I done my whole dissertation for my Bachelor of Education degree, was on people who are intelligent but have dyslexia. I'm not saying like I'm super bright or anything, but dyslexia can affect anyone no matter what their IQ is. But the tests for dyslexia only will pick out children who are failing, and I wasn't failing, but I wasn't doing as well as I should have been doing, so the system didn't pick me up, and my parents, knowing something wasn't quite right, actually had to take me privately to a specialist to get assessed, because the school wouldn't do it because I wasn't failing. But in school, I had a hard time with reading and spelling, but I was never bottom of the class. I had learnt enough technique, and I don't want to say cheating, but sort of cheats to get around tests and things, that if you were to assess the class, I was about the middle. But from a young age, I did have a love for stories and a love for reading, even though I did not have the ability to do so. And I think it was about primary 5, which would be the age of 9-ish, started to really notice that some people were better than others at reading. Now, for those of you outside the UK, we in our primary schools, which go from the ages of 4 to 11, have what is called guided reading, in the higher classes anyway. Some do it in the lower classes, some don't, where the class is split into reading groups depending on their reading ability, and they're all given a novel to take home. They read it at home, but they also read it in class with the teacher. She watches them, sees how they're progressing, how they're getting on, asks them questions to make sure they're understanding it, and so on. So about P5 is when I realised that there was different groups, and the groups were split up because of how good they were, and that I was not in the top group. And I don't remember being upset by this, but I remember thinking I want to be in that top group. I want to be reading the bigger books, because at that stage they were on sort of little chapter books, whereas I was still on like picture books, 1 line per page type deals. And I wanted more than anything than to be on the chapter books. So I settled myself down to try hard to prove that I was worth the top group. I had my mum do extra reading with me. I tried so hard in spelling tests and in all my English homework. I just spent double the time on an English homework than I did on a numeracy homework to try and get a good mark, to try and prove to the teacher that I could be moved up. I wanted my mum to write a letter to say that she wanted me moved up. I just wanted to be in that top group so bad. And it actually took me about 2 years, but I did work my way up to the top group of reading. I was about P5 when I wanted to be in the top group, and a wee bit through P7 I finally reached the top group, and I was only in the top group for about 6 months before leaving for high school, where they don't do reading groups, so it didn't matter. But it was still, in my eyes, totally worth it. It changed me as a person with work ethic and working for what you want, as well as sort of developing my reading much faster than I think it ever would have happened without that. And plus, in P7, I got to read some amazing books as part of that top group that are still some of my favourite today, like Goodnight Mr. Tom and The Silver Sword. Some really beautiful books that have impacted me in my reading life. So those 6 months of reading were really good, and I don't begrudge any of the work that I put into getting there. But we're getting sidetracked a little bit. The Tales of Olga de Polga was one of the books that the higher group was reading. So obviously I wasn't getting this book home. But those were the books that I wanted to train on. I have another one. This one was one that I always read as well, Paddy's Pot of Gold. I don't think I ever read these books as children. I didn't have the ability to do so when I was a child, hence why they didn't put me in the top reading group. But I made my mum buy me these for Christmas. There was more than these two, but these are the two that I found and the two that I really have a memory of being so excited for. So for Christmas that year, I asked my mum to buy me the books that the top reading group were reading that year so that she could read them with me and we could practice. It's so sad. It's so sad. Is it any wonder, like, I became a teacher? I was obsessed with education from the get-go. But yeah, so that's the sort of little story time about this. I got my parents to buy me this for Christmas because the top group was reading it. And that is more than anything at that time what I wanted. That was my educational goals. That was I was working towards. I was putting my Saturdays into reading more to try and get up. I was sort of half reading this. I was getting a lot of obviously support from my parents because I wasn't able to do it or they would have had me in the top group. I was getting a lot of support from my parents reading it, and then I was going into school and like, do you remember Olga to Polga? Yeah. I like pretending as if I was in the top group because I could discuss the book and like talking with the other kids that were in the top group about it. Like, did you like that book? Like, what part was your favorite part? And yeah, so this is my 100th book of the year, which if you had asked me even last year, I would not have said was possible. And if you'd have asked 9-year-old me if you would ever be able to actually read this book, I'd have said no. So get in there, girl. We're finally reading a book that 9-year-olds should have been reading. So that's sort of my little story time for this episode. I wasn't quite sure how long that would take, but unedited it's about 10 minutes, so it probably won't be very long once I chop out all my rambling. Which is a bit short for a novelty chats video. So I'm going to have to think of something else because I do not plan these videos. I just ramble and try to make it about sort of 15-20 minutes once edited if I can. So now I'm going to have to think of something else to talk to you about. Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim. This is one of my favourite books of all time. It's also, like, excluding Disney, one of my favourite books of all time, or favourite movies of all time. The movie's called The Secret in Nim, not Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim, and it is predominantly animated by Don Bluth, who is one of my favourite animators of all time. I'm really into animation, and I love Don Bluth's work. If you're at all into animation and are not familiar with Don Bluth, I would definitely go and check him out. He done an adaptation of Thumbelina that's really cool. A Troll in Central Park, or Stanley's Magic Garden, depending on where you live, is what it's called. Is awesome. Secrets in Them. He does lots of really, really great work at a time in sort of the early 80s when Disney was going through their dark age, as they now call it. Bluth's movies were surpassing them animation style, head over heels. So yeah, it's a good movie. I would check that out. I've actually talked to a lot of people who have loved the movie from children but didn't know that it was a book. The book is not very well known, and also being of a different title I think doesn't help. But the general premise of the story, for anyone who doesn't know, is there are rats who were captured by the National Institute of Mental Health, and experiments were done on them, which in the end make them live longer and be much smarter. Like, they can read, write. They're like pretty much as smart as humans, and they have their own sort of little civilization. It brings up topics of how animals are treated in our society, how some animals are treated, like some are treated as pests and some are treated as pets. It brings up civilization, it brings up morality and animal testing and lots of different things, which are really quite heavy topics for a children's book. But I love the writing, I love the characters, and I absolutely adore the story of this book. What a lot of people don't know, even if they do know that the book exists, is that it is actually a series. The second one is called Rasco and the Rats of Nim. The third one, there's only 3, is called R.T. Margaret and the Rats of Nim. I don't have a physical copy of that with me right now, but why people don't maybe know that the second and third exist is because it's actually written by Jane Leslie Connolly, which is Robert C. O'Brien's daughter. So it wasn't written by the original author, it was written by his daughter. And is it just me who thinks this is super, super interesting? I enjoyed the second and third books. They don't have the special place in the heart that the first one has, but then that's nothing to do with necessarily how good these books are. The characters are great, the story is good, and the writing style is kind of similar. Like, if you were to tell me that it was the same person, I would say, but did you read it a lot of years later? Like, I wouldn't necessarily believe that it was a different person, but at the same time I would know that it wasn't quite right. Did they write it a lot in later life, or did they write these ones beforehand type deal? Sort of like the To Kill a Mockingbird, Go Set a Watchman, conspiracy theories, whatever you think about that book. Did she write it? Did she not? I don't think we'll ever know. But yeah, these are solid books, and it's really interesting to me that it was written by the daughter. Obviously, when he died, the sort of intellectual property and the estate must have been reverted to the children, giving them free reign of the sort of intellectual property and the licensing and whatever else. And she published her own 2 books, which continue on. I think they're a really nice flow to the series, and yeah, I think it's pretty seamless for having 2 different authors. Obviously, father and daughter. She was obviously very aware of her father's personality and writing style and the original story, and possibly other ideas that he had that never came to light. But I can't think of any other series that, like, a child or spouse or anything, like, picked up the story and continued it on so many years later. Let's see how many years later.
First published in 71. First published in 86. So
It's 15 years between the 2, which I guess is quite a long time for the second book of a series to come out. So yeah, I reread Miss Frisby and the Rats of Nim last week, and I'm not picking it up at the minute, but I will eventually pick up Rasco and also RT and Margaret and the Rats of Nim, and continue on with the series. It's actually been so long since I've read this one that I remember there's like a big shocker, but I can't remember what the shocker is. I have a couple of ideas, but I'm not completely sure. So I think this is going to be fun to reread. To open up a bit of a discussion, feel free to tell me below. Firstly, if you know of any series that are similar to this, where a different person, after the decease of one, continued it on. Or do you guys like rereading books? I know a lot of people don't, and I like rereading some books, and I don't like reading others. Obviously, you're not going to reread a book that was bad, and you're more likely to read a book that you really love. But even there's books that I love that I wouldn't necessarily reach to reread, and there's books that wouldn't make my top 10 books of all time, but I would reread happily. So I would be interested to know your thoughts on that. I don't really have much more to talk about this week, apart from like a quick update. I said I was going to pick up The Fellowship of the Ring and try to reread, or a reread attempt. I never managed it the whole way through. The Lord of the Rings series, although I know it's not a series, it's one book split into 3 books, but it's 3 physical books. And there was also a couple of other series that I said I was stalling on, and I didn't know why. I haven't picked any of them up. I was in a bit of a reading, I thought I had a reading slump coming on, something shocking, and I managed to preemptively stop it. Do you know, like, you haven't got a headache, but you feel like you're going to have a headache, so you knock back a couple of paracetamol because you don't want to go there. I knocked back Miss Frisby and the Rats of Nim, and it didn't. The I escaped my reading slump. So if y'all are looking for a book that'll escape you from a reading slump as well, a good old favourite is the way to do it. Maybe not your favourites, but my favourites always pull me out. I also wanted to run something else past you guys before we go. If I decide to do it, I'll do obviously a separate sort of announcement video type thing, but I was thinking of doing a read-along in September that would be a month long, the whole of September, and it would be one where you could feel free to participate as much or as little as you liked. And I was going to try and reread every Sherlock Holmes novel in the month of September. This is my bind up. It has been battered and bruised. This poor thing has seen many wars. It has been on holidays and camping trips, dropped in puddles. It's been to hospital with me. This thing has seen it all. And without notes or anything, it goes up to sort of you can't even see that, 1,500 pages-ish of quite small text. But this edition is illustrated with the original illustrations from Strand magazine. For those that don't know, Sherlock Holmes novels were published in the Strand magazine as sort of like installments, so like a little bit every week as opposed to full books when they came out. So that was the original illustrations. That's where the deerstalker cap came from. You see Sherlock Holmes in that hat with the ear flaps. It's never mentioned in the book that he wears a deerstalker cap, but the illustrator for the Strand was somehow involved. I can't remember the ins and outs. He invented it or such like, and part of his payment was, I can't even find one of the pictures, he was allowed in one story to draw him wearing it, although it's not mentioned in the story at all, but he's allowed to draw Sherlock Holmes wearing his hat, and that was like his payment for it, which has become an iconic image and is never really mentioned in the book. Also, in none of the work of Sherlock Holmes does he ever say elementary, my dear Watson. He calls some things elementary, and a couple of times he refers to Watson as dear Watson, but he never says elementary, my dear Watson, which is probably one of his like most well-known catchphrases, and in the original books he never says it. But I was going to do a read-along. I'm going to try and read all the books, but I was thinking of, if you guys wanted to participate and read along with me, you wouldn't have to do them all. Obviously, I'm not going to force anyone to sit and read these, although like I love them and I would suggest that everyone does slowly make their way through them all. But to do them in a month is quite hefty. But I was going to do a video on each one, so every time I finish one of the novels, do a review / discussion, and then but like save them all to the end of the month. So I would obviously finish the first one in a couple of days, but not put that up. Put them all up in a playlist at the end of the month, and then depending on what ones you have read, then you could go and watch the videos and participate in the discussion, if that makes sense. So tell me what you guys think of a Sherlock Holmes readathon in the month of September. I was thinking for fall I want to start reading. I have some books lined up that I've been saving for Halloween times. One of them I was talking about in a tag video earlier, October Skies. It's sort of like a horror, mystery, people going lost in the woods type story. I've had this for a couple of months, but I'm saving it for October. And I have a couple of scary sort of suspense books that I've been saving. So I thought to save time until then, I might reread all of these because they're kind of scary. They're sort of suspenseful. It's a bit of mystery. And I love them all, and I'm, as I said, feeling a bit reading slumpy, so I think they'll be easy reads. I also have them all on audiobook, so I'll be able to tackle them that way and just try and get through this monster game, because it's been years since I've read them all. I think I read this whole thing when I was about 17, 18, maybe younger, maybe 16, and I've read some of them since then, but not like the full thing. So yeah, it's been a good 3 years since me and my pal Sherlock Holmes have been reunited. So I feel like I'm getting away. I said this in my last one. I feel like I'm getting away from my reading roots. That sounds really weird. But like mystery is my bag. And I feel as if I haven't read a lot of mystery recently at all. And I really want to get back into it. Like that's the genre that I love. That's the genre that I have most passion for. So yeah, I'm going to be doing this in September. But tell me whether you think the video idea read along type thing is a good idea or not, and I think that's all I have to say for this video. That's us. Thank you for joining me for Novelty Chats episode 2. I did say in the first one I was going to make it fortnightly, but I've decided to make it weekly because I enjoyed the first one and I had more stuff to ramble about than I would have thought. So give me your opinions down below. The point of these is that they're chatty and relaxed and there's a lot of sort of interaction. I always reply to all my comments as quickly as possible, as well as Twitter. If you want to find me down there, that's all linked in the description as well. And yeah, I think that is us for now. I hope you're all happy. I hope you're all healthy and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.